There is a thick braid of copper running through our world, quietly doing its job, and most of us never even notice. It's the safety net of our electrical systems, giving power surges and faults a place to go, grounding out dangerous energy and keeping things from exploding, literally. Without it, every flick of a switch or plug into a socket would be a gamble. That copper grid is the silent hero, protecting us and keeping the power flowing safely. It's invisible to most, but it's what stands between us and disaster every single day. Think of the countless man-hours it takes to install and maintain the copper ground grid, teams working tirelessly in all conditions to ensure it's done right. But once it's in place, that copper does its job day in and day out without a word of complaint, silently protecting us from electrical faults and keeping everything running smoothly. It's like the foundation of a well-run business, built on sweat and effort, yet quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. And that is an excerpt from the Right Already Substack by my friend and colleague Nick Bibeau, an electrical field engineer in a major United States city. So, welcome to the 3 Deeper Cuts podcast. I'm your host, Chuck G. Every couple of weeks, we bring you something to think about, something to read, and something to listen to. So Nick and I just kind of connected on the internet, and we had both been in writing communities, both working on articles, books, what have you, and we got to talking about our day jobs in X spaces, and come to find out that he works on the grid, and I knew nothing about that, but I had become increasingly interested in this topic just because it's important, and I've lived in areas where the grid has failed. In fact, for 2 years in a row, in the winters in Texas, there was a major storm, and just things went down. Fortunately, my place where I lived was fine, but a lot of people I knew were affected to the point where they were literally freezing in their own houses. They had to go out and sleep in their trucks. And that combined with some of the other stuff I've been reading, the books of Robert Spalding, the retired Air Force general, who is one of the very few voices who's talking about Chinese Communist Party influence in the West, and the writings of Annie Jacobsen, the most recent book called Nuclear War, and there's a chapter in that book where she talks about a hypothetical EMF bomb. Well, it's not hypothetical, that these weapons actually exist. They're not explosions per se, like what you would see on a classical bomb explosion, but it's an explosion of electromagnetic frequencies that will disrupt all of our devices, cell phone towers, internet connections, electrical grid, and so on and so forth. So in this conversation, Nick also cleared up some things. So the kind of the myth that everything is manufactured in China, it's actually not. There's transformers that are manufactured in Germany, the United States, Canada, Korea. So it's not all concentrated in communist China. But this was a great conversation, and I think you will enjoy it. So get your popcorn, snuggle up by the fire, and enjoy this podcast with Nick Bibeau from Right Already.
And I built my way up from a guy digging ditches and, the knuckle dragger who was out in the field putting all the equipment together to a journeyman, served an apprenticeship that was 3 years, and then took some passed some tests, and got into a separate apprenticeship, which was what we call a substation technician. My actual title is substation technician, but the people that do my job basically in the rest of the country and even the rest of the world are called field engineers. So we call ourselves field engineers because it sounds cooler. Gotcha. But I actually didn't have to get a degree in engineering or anything like that. It was all trained in-house through my company, and I took classes for 3 years while also being in the field getting what they call OJT, on-the-job training. And that was a 3-year apprenticeship as well. Graduated from that, and now I'm a journeyman substation technician, aka electrical field engineer. And we can get into the details of that, but that's sort of my journey of how I found myself in this career. And to be honest with you, dude, I feel so blessed because I could not have picked a better career for myself if I was in charge of this when I was 21 years old, when I first got into it. Wow. It is the most secure job imaginable. Everybody needs to have power. Everybody needs to have the lights on. And so it's not going anywhere anytime soon, no matter how much technology changes. There may be different ways that we get that power, solar and as technology changes, but my job isn't the generation side, it's the delivery. We make sure that the electricity gets delivered to everybody's home safely, reliably, efficiently. And so it's the most secure job imaginable. It's a really fun job. I get to solve problems. I work with so many really cool, smart, interesting, creative people. And it's amazing, dude. So that's how I got into it, and that's where I'm at now. And I could not imagine another career that would work better for my life and providing for myself and my family.
That's awesome, man. Makes me feel good to know that there's like happy electricians out there in the field that enjoyed the journey. So I'm the knuckle dragger now. So can you explain to me, can you define what exactly a substation is and how does it fit into the power grid?
Yeah, absolutely. So the power grid, I've been thinking about this because I know you're a doctor. You can think of the power grid as like a nervous system. So the brain is the power plant, and it sends all the electrical signals out to our nervous system to tell our fingers to move and our toes to wiggle and beat our heart and all that, right? Okay. So the substation is sort of the go-between between the brain and the ends of our nervous system. That the way that the grid works is we produce power at a very, very high voltage. And we can get into that a little bit more, but you can basically think of voltage as pressure or the speed that the electricity flows. So because we push that power over very long distances, hundreds if not thousands of miles, we want it at a really high voltage because it's a lot more efficient. It makes everything go faster, you have less losses, less heat, all that kind of stuff. And where the substation comes in is it's the go-between between the power plants and the homes that are getting the power delivered. So it steps that voltage down to a much lower voltage that's a lot more manageable so that it can go on the power poles on your city streets or underground, deliver to your house so that your lights turn on and your receptacles are there for you to charge your phone and plug your toaster in. So depending on where you're at in the world, most likely you have overhead transmission lines, normally next to freeways, and they're the really tall towers with the lines that are strung from tower to tower. That's the high voltage, and those go into the substations. That's where I live. That's my world. And we make sure that all the power is flowing efficiently, and the transformers step the voltage down correctly so that it can get delivered to everyone's home, keep the lights on.
Got you. Okay, so let me repeat some of that back. So the high voltage is akin to being like high pressure or speed, and it's more efficient for getting the power over long distances. You work as a field technician or manager at one of these substations, which is like a go-between. So is that where the transformers are located?
Correct, yes. Okay. Transformers and then circuit breakers, and these are high voltage circuit breakers, so I'm sure you've seen circuit breakers in your house. The little switches that you turn on and off, they're there to protect in case something shorts and you don't cause a fire, right? Or you don't get electrocuted, it trips it offline. So my world is working with the very high voltage transformers and circuit breakers to make sure that we do the same thing. If a line hits a tree or somebody hits a pole with their car and the pole falls over, we have circuit breakers to make sure that the power gets shut off right away and doesn't cause more damage.
That sounds like it could potentially be dangerous.
Yes. Very dangerous job, yes. People die all the time, all around the world, doing the work that I do every day.
When was the last time you had a close call?
It's been a while, to be honest. Now that I'm on the engineering side, I don't work directly with the equipment as much. I work with what we call protective relays more, which are taking in the information from all the equipment and protecting it, basically, making sure the circuit breakers work the way they're supposed to and the transformers do. When I was in the field working with my hands on the equipment more, I had several close calls, and I think the last one would have been maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where I was basically about a foot away from contacting a live conductor, and I would have been unrecognizable. I would have closed casket kind of funeral. I would have been burnt to a crisp. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so let's get back to the substations, because this is where I think if for those of us not in the field, this sounds like it's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So I work at a hospital. Having power is crucial. I mean, if power goes out at my house, a place that I live for a day, it'd be inconvenient. But if power goes out at the hospital or at a clinic, it could potentially be life-threatening. Now, granted, they have backup sources of power, but let's pretend that they don't. What are the things that can potentially go wrong at a substation with the circuit breakers and the transformers?
I'm glad you brought up hospitals because that's a big part of our world. We have circuits that feed hospitals, and they are the most critical circuits. So they kind of have this golden aura around them. And normally we have redundancy for hospital circuits, which means if you have one feed that feeds that hospital, you always have a backup feed. And we have a sort of scheme to where if you lose one circuit for any reason, it automatically transfers over within less than a second so that there's no interruption in power to the hospitals. So all utilities are hyper aware of the fact that keeping power on for hospitals means, life or death, literally, right? So we when you come into a substation, we have sort of different nomenclature for circuits, and a circuit that feeds a hospital is very highlighted. It's the most critical circuits that we work on. As far as something that could go wrong, all sorts of stuff, man. Everything down from a squirrel or a raccoon getting into a live conductor, a transformer, pad-mounted transformer. You've probably seen them in parking lots, a little green box.
Okay.
You can get a critter in there, and they can cross two phases together or cross something a line. Not only will the poor little critter die, but also you're going to lose power to a hospital, for example, or a business or residential. So that's one thing that can go wrong. And then there's again obvious stuff, a line coming down because of failed piece of equipment, a tree falling on it, and then there's stuff that goes all the way back to the generation side of things. So it's a very delicate system, the power grid, and this is the kind of thing that it's sort of like a dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about. But there's so many moving parts. So everything goes back to the power plant where the electricity is being created, where it's being generated. And we can have problems with that. These are all spinning turbines. A very basic way to visualize it is water. I'm sure everyone knows that a lot of power plants come from dams. So they dam up a bunch of water, and then they control the flow of that water to spin a turbine. And basically all power, besides DC power like solar or whatever, but traditionally all power comes from a spinning turbine of some sort. And you can use water, you can use natural gas, you can use nuclear power, but all of it is basically creating steam, which is spinning a turbine. So you can have problems on that side of things because we're dealing with natural elements again. We're dealing with water, natural gas, right? And when things go wrong at the source, basically at the power plant side, that has trickle down effects all the way down the whole grid through the substation, all the way to the hospital, the business, or the apartment that's got power going to it, right? So I couldn't go through the whole list, but there's so many things that can go wrong with the delivery of electricity because we're talking about microseconds. There's 60 hertz, so every 60 seconds you have a new sine wave of electrons flowing in to keep everything flowing, and there's a whole world out there of elements that's looking to disrupt that.
Wow. Okay. So the next question I have is, all right, so assuming everything is working properly, and we know that there's hundreds upon hundreds of things that could potentially go wrong. I'm curious as to, so if you own an appliance at home or something, I don't know, like an old piece of equipment, there's some things that you can just troubleshoot yourself. Like I have an old typewriter on my desk. I can look at some YouTube videos and troubleshoot it myself. If something goes wrong with a transformer, obviously, you're the expert, but I'm just curious, like, where are they manufactured? Like, who writes the manual for these?
That's a great question, man. The transformers that we work with here in California, some of the names that come to mind are Hyundai, out of Korea. They create transformers. GE, General Electric, which I think most of their transformers are actually made in Canada. There's ABB, which is in Florida, if I'm not mistaken. So that's an American-owned company. So really all over the world. But I think the general consensus from people that I've talked to within my company and people that have worked all around the world is the best transformers in the world are made in Germany. And which is probably not surprising, Yeah. pretty good at making cars and everything else too. But yeah, I think I would say probably 50% of the transformers that we install here in California are made outside of the U.S.
Now, okay, so South Korea, United States, and in Germany, those countries don't seem to be like a direct threat to the United States. But, you hear like a lot of stuff in the news and on podcasts about some transformers being manufactured in China. So how much of that is true, and how much is like kind of this paranoia of an overseas hacker, getting into our power grid and shutting down transformers? How much of that is true, and how much of it is rumor?
Well, I would say it sounds a lot like rumors because first off, where the transformer is manufactured doesn't mean that you're going to be able to shut it down. There's a whole telecommunication software side of things where sabotage can happen. I've never seen a Chinese-made transformer in my company here in California. Maybe it's a thing in the rest of the United States. But even if they're creating the transformer, that's just hardware. The concern comes in when it comes to the software side of things. And I'll say not all of our software is US made either. We have a lot that comes from Canada, and the main protective relay software that we use is also from Germany.
Okay. So it's not as easy as what a lot of spokespeople make it sound for a nefarious actor to shut down an entire city.
It's easy, but it's going to be more easy for somebody locally. It would be a local terrorist that's got boots on the ground here that could shut everything down a whole lot quicker than on the cyber side of things. There are definitely threats on the software cyber side of things. The one thing that the people that I talk with worry about the most is an EMF bomb. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Yeah, electromagnetic frequency bomb. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Annie Jacobson. It's like all over her book about nuclear war.
Yeah.
Can you explain? Yeah, can you just kind of break that down for us?
Yeah, so electromagnetic, so electricity and magnetism are very closely tied together. And if you want, man, we can get a little bit more into the physics of this. I have a
please. Absolutely.
unique Bibeau analogy for how I like to explain electricity. But very quickly, just to answer your question, you can create a very intense magnetic force. And if you create a magnetic force, you're creating an electrical force, and vice versa. And whenever electricity flows, you're creating a magnetic force. You can create a very strong magnetic force that could completely disrupt the flow of electricity in any major city. And I'm no expert on this, but people that are a whole lot smarter than me have explained it to me. And I think that's probably the biggest threat to our electrical power grid in the United States, is a nefarious actor being able to come in and drop some sort of a electromagnetic bomb. Because it's very hard to track. Basically, it's very hard to keep it out, because it's not like a nuclear bomb or something like that. You know, it's very small, actually, the physical hardware of what it would take to make one. So not to scare anybody, but I've heard from a lot of people pretty high up that that's what keeps them up at night. That's what keeps them worried and what they're trying to guard against.
So. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about, there's no concern about scaring people on this podcast in particular. You know, a weird thing happened, man. I went through that book. It's called Nuclear War, A Scenario by Annie Jacobson, and I found out about it through Sean Ryan's podcast. So I read the thing. It was probably like one of the fastest books I've ever read, just out of like obsessive interest. And by the end of it, you know, she basically walks through a hypothetical situation of a nuclear attack, you know, between the United States and North Korea, and then, you know, basically like, you know, our bombs, our ballistic missiles have to go over Russia into North Korea, and then they fire back at us. So there's a whole section in there, you know. On these EMF bombs, like separate from the nuclear attack. And she talks about like this, you know, wiping out a city. And like, I actually got less stressed out the more I was reading about this. You know what I mean?
I feel it, yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, okay. So all this means is that I need to enjoy life right now.
Memento mori, brother.
Right? Memento mori. Just let's write more. So all right. So let's cross over a little bit. So, I want to get into like kind of how you developed your writing obsession alongside your work, because it's a very demanding job. It's obviously some risks involved. So your story is kind of helpful to people because you managed to develop this habit, and it's helped you a lot just psychologically and now professionally. You're making money from your writing.
Yeah, man. I like, because I've never really come at why I started writing from this angle. And the fact that I have the career and the job that I do is a big piece of it that I don't think I've really ever shared with you or anybody. I have a love for podcasts too, as you know. I've had my own podcast, Laughing Stoic Buddha, since 2019. And I had many reasons to want to get my voice out there, many reasons to want to be creative. And I started with the podcast, and I realized for me, if I want to be creative and I want to create a daily habit where I'm able to express myself and be creative, I can't rely on another person, like needing to sit down with somebody and schedule with them to be able to record a podcast every day, for example.
Yep.
But even if I was recording my own stuff, I don't want to rely on the equipment of having to set up the audio and sit down and talk and not be able to be mobile. So one of the reasons I landed on writing is it's something that I can do sitting in my truck before my workday starts. I can open up my laptop and I can write for 30 minutes. I can do it on the job site. All I need is a little bit of space on a table, set my laptop out and write. And so it's a very practical thing for me to be able to do wherever, not reliant on anybody else. It's something that I completely control. So I decided, this is, I'd started doing the podcast in 2019. I was 29, and it just wasn't quite hitting what I needed. It wasn't the creative outlet fully that I was looking for. And I also wanted to get my voice out there. And as you know, Chuck, part of the reason is I am painfully aware of my own mortality. And the reason that I want to get my voice and my story out there is I want to leave something for my daughters. I always imagine that if I were to pass away, I want to hand something to them. I sort of bullshitted myself for a while and said it's going to be the podcast. They're going to be able to understand their dad through hearing his voice, hearing his conversations with people, hearing him tell his story. But it became very clear to me that that wasn't the best vehicle to do that it was actually writing. So I started writing to them. I started writing to my daughters with the idea of being able to have the peace of mind that if I were to pass away, I have a shitload of written words written with them in mind, with them as my audience, and I could feel a little bit more at peace in those final moments, knowing that I'm leaving a piece of myself behind, not just pictures, not just my voice, not just money, not just possessions, but a piece of my soul. And the way that I have best found to leave that is through the written word. So it's a combination of that. That was the big motivator. And then the very practical reason of I can write anywhere. This laptop that I'm speaking to you on right now is like inseparable from me. I got my phone, I got my wallet, I got my keys, and I got my laptop anywhere and everywhere I go. And so nice. I can lay it out, and I do a lot of writing at coffee shops. I do a lot of writing on the job site before my clock-in time, during my lunch break. Sometimes even after I get off work to let traffic die down, I'll set up in the substation and write for a little bit before I drive home. And so, yeah, that's really why I landed on writing, sort of the mission behind it, to write to my daughters, to share my voice, to have some sort of a creative expression. And yeah, the practical side is it's easy. All I need is to open up my laptop and start typing.
This is going to sound kind of random, but what is a substation? Is it like an office, or like is it it's a bunch of towers? I'm looking it up right. Okay.
Yeah, it's
wow. Okay, this is really technical.
It's normally a fenced off area, and it's got most of them are big shiny metal pieces of equipment. I'm just thinking of somebody that doesn't know the names of stuff, right? A bunch of power lines, a bunch of big circuit breakers, as I mentioned, that kind of look like six-legged upside-down horses, I guess, is one way to explain it.
Gotcha.
A bunch of transformers, and when people think of transformers, they think of the little garbage can-looking stuff that's on utility poles or telephone poles, right? But in a substation, transformers look like a little cottage, like a mini house. They're huge. And then where I mostly work is inside the control house. So it doesn't quite look like an office. It looks like if you've ever been in a telecommunication room or something like that, just a shitload of relays, or basically they all look like computers, and thousands of wires hooked up to them. And I normally find a little corner within that control house, set my table out, and get my laptop open and write whenever the hell I can.
That's awesome, dude. That's such a cool visual. I'm just kind of scanning through some images of these substations from all over the world.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't post about it much online, almost never. Sometimes you can see them in the background just because, they are critical sites, and I don't want to be giving away any secrets to bad actors. Absolutely.
The geography, needs to remain, fairly confidential.
Yeah.
The specifics of where the sites are located. But I would imagine that, being someone that grew up in the Bay Area, you probably know that city like inside out, like better than anyone ever possibly could, because you work in the utilities. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely, dude. So I've been fortunate enough to have worked in San Francisco for like a decade, basically. I mean, maybe 8 or 9 years. Not consistently. I'd work there for a year or two and then go end up working somewhere else. but I know that city inside and out. I have a map of that entire city inside of my brain based on where the substations are. So one thing I should say, like you were saying, I work at a particular substation. I actually work at probably close to 100 different substations. So I'm sort of a roaming guy. And where my job is at now, it's mostly when shit hits the fan somewhere, when something needs to get fixed, I show up and to the substation and fix it. So yeah, in San Francisco is so cool because they were one of the first places in the world, them in New York. It's actually New York, but San Francisco wasn't too far behind, that were electrified. So we've actually taken out equipment that has dates on it from the 1800s that was still in service, protecting the power lines. And so, you get a certain connection to a city when you work on the utility power generation side of it. And I know all parts of San Francisco, all parts of Oakland where I work at, based on where the nearest substation is. I know where
cool.
Where the good food is, where the good coffee shops are, all that stuff,
So from like a lay of the land standpoint, what makes it? I mean, I would imagine like substations that are closer to like hills or mountains, like those would be a little bit more protected and less likely to fail, or is it the opposite? Like they're more prone to wildfires?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm thinking of over here in the Bay Area, we have Half Moon Bay. I don't know if you've ever been there or heard of it, but it's got a lot of hills and trees and redwoods and stuff like that. And it's close to the water as well. That's the substation that has the most hazards because it's got all sorts of trees and wildlife and birds and squirrels that get into equipment and all that. The substations that are actually like in the city, like in a downtown metropolitan area, don't have a lot of problems besides when like a crackhead or somebody breaks into it, tries to steal some copper that's actually energized and fries themselves. But that's pretty rare. So most of the actual trouble that we have with substations tends to be in the more rural areas, more of the wildlife areas.
So you're outside a lot, like you're not, like it's still hands-on, just like when you started out, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm outside. My work day starts at 6:30, and I'm kind of a madman. I'm known as the early bird, so I'm normally there at 5:30 or 6, so I can write for a while before the job starts. So yeah, we're normally out in the elements. We're out in the cold. We're out in the rain. It's been really hot this week. It's been like a heat wave over here in the Bay Area, and I've been having to work outside because I'm working on the equipment on the technical side, but I still gotta stand out there in the sun to work on it. So I spend a lot of time outside, and luckily my very supportive, loving wife makes sure that I always have enough sunscreen to cover up. I've been doing good at that. I always got really bad the first couple of years. I used to get sunburned and all sorts of extra freckles and shit on my face. So I've done a lot better. Yeah,
the crispy garlic beef or the beef and noodles.
Yes, man. Yeah. So yes, to answer your question, that's why I emphasized field engineer earlier on, is because I spend a lot of time outside, and I got a hard hat on, and I got work boots, and it's a pretty physical job. I get easily 5,000 to 10,000 steps a day just performing my work. So there's definitely a physical side to it.
That's awesome. So I want to get back more into like some of the riskier parts of the job. Are there any particular substations that are more hazardous?
Totally, man. So, I want to give my little unique breakdown on electricity, and I'll tie it into the hazard.
Yeah, please.
Side of things. Yeah. Okay. So this is for the absolute layman, and I'm sure there's going to be some physicists or other electrical engineers out there that'll rip this apart. But you know me, Chuck. I'm poetic. I'm a storyteller, right?
Sure.
So I'm going to take some liberties in this. So I had a really hard time when I first started, when I was a ditch digger and guy operating the broom, sweeping. I had a really hard time understanding electricity beyond just the formulas. So Ohm's law and voltage and current and resistance and wattage and all that. I understood it on paper, but I really wanted to be able to visualize how electricity works. Really, first off, to understand why it's dangerous, and to understand, just to be able to see the flow of electricity and when it goes right or how it can go wrong. So I developed a lot of my own analogies and visuals along the way to help. And because I'm in more of a leadership position now, I pass these down to a lot of newer guys, and they've always told me, some will say it's the most helpful way of looking at it. Some will at least say they definitely will never forget it when I share it with them. So the way that I like to explain electricity is the flow of electrons. So this is a natural process that would happen if humans never came along. Look at lightning, right? Lightning happens without any human intervention. Same thing like static electricity. You rub your socks across a carpet and you go and touch a doorknob and you get shocked. What's going on there? You're getting electrically charged and you're discharging through the doorknob when you touch it. So the way that I like to explain what electricity is, the flow of electrons, is every atom in the universe is in 3 different states when it comes to electricity. It's either positively charged, negatively charged, or neutral, not charged, right? A negatively charged atom has more electrons than it needs. It's got an excess of electrons, right? A positively charged atom has a deficit of electrons. It doesn't have enough electrons. And then every other atom in the world is perfectly balanced. It's got just enough electrons to be balanced. It doesn't need to get rid of any, and it's not looking to get any, right? So the way that I think about that is a negatively charged atom is like a male. He's got an excess of something. And a positively charged atom is a female. It doesn't have enough of something, and it's looking for it. It's looking for more electrons. Give me more electrons. Nice. Okay. Now, a cloud can become very negatively charged. It can get a shitload of electrons because it's away from the ground, right? So it just sort of in the same way that when we rub our socks across the carpet as we're walking, we're gaining electrons. We're becoming negatively charged, right? The cloud can get a shitload of electrons, and it can get so many, it can become so negatively charged and so sort of looking to discharge, looking to get rid of these electrons, that it finds it, and it's the ground. So the ground is always positively charged. The ground, when I say the ground, I mean literally Earth, right? The Earth crust itself is always looking for more electrons. It can't get enough. Again, in the analogy, this cloud is the male. He's looking to give something. The ground is the female. She's looking to receive something. And when that difference between the two gets strong enough, you get a lightning bolt. And all those electrons charge down to the ground. So the cloud gets the relief of discharging all of its electrons, and the ground, the female, gets the electrons that it's looking for, and everything is balanced and everything's good for a moment until the cloud starts charging up again and the ground starts to get a deficit of electrons and it's looking for more again. Now, I think you see where I'm going with this, Chuck?
For sure.
Okay, so what I like to say is that what we do is we take this male energy, this excess of electrons that it's looking to give to the female. And what the power grid is creating a huge excess of those electrons, one that would never happen in nature, right?
Okay.
And we're forcing those electrons across the grid, looking for mommy, looking for that female that needs to receive. It has a deficit. Give me some electrons. The male energy, that is the negatively charged excess of electrons, is looking for a place to give it. Now, I'm dancing around it, but I'm talking about sex here, guys. Okay.
Got some good, yeah, that's actually a good analogy, man.
You see it, right? Now I'm really going to bring it all home here real quick, okay? So, a guy, if he can get some
Yahtzee
for quick and easy and for free, he's going to get it, right? But most guys can't. They got to do some work. They got to make some money. They got to make themselves look good. They got to go to the gym. They got to get a mouthpiece on them. They have to have some reason to entice the woman into letting them sleep with them, right? And in the analogy of electricity here, what we're doing is we're not giving them the female for free, for easy. We're making them do some work for it. So we create this sort of sexual frustration and charge and need for the electrons to go get their woman, but we're going to make them do some work before they do it. And that work is the power, the lights being on, the toasters running, the phones charging. Because what the electrons do is they flow through a resistor, and that resistor is what we call power. That's why the lights turn on. That's why our phones are able to charge. And on the other side of that is ground. I don't know if you've done any work on your home, but there's always a hot and a neutral.
Okay.
Neutral is another word for ground. It's the return back to ground. So it's taking the flow of the electrons, it's making it go through a resistor to do some work, and then it's returning back to ground. So as I've explained this to people over the years, and I've always used it for myself, what goes wrong is when you don't make the electrons do work first to get to ground. That's what we call that's what we call a short.
Okay.
So these very sexually frustrated electrons are flowing along their power line, right? And they're going to do the work that it takes to get their woman, right? They're going to turn on the lights. They're going to do whatever. They're not happy about it, but they're going to do it because, come on, they're guys, right?
For sure, yeah.
Now, a tree comes along and touches that power line, and now all that sexually frustrated energy goes, oh my God, we got a free ride. We can go to home. We don't have to do any work for it. So you get a whole lot of electrons flowing through that tree because now they don't have to work for it. They got a straight path to ground, and things go crazy. And that's when stuff catches on fire. That's when stuff melts.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So to keep everything, part of what my job is to make sure that the balance between this male and female energy is correct, that the men are frustrated enough and charged enough to, do the work that's necessary to keep all the lights on and keep the power flowing, and to make sure that the female is properly grounded, and she's going to make sure that the men do their work before they're allowed to discharge into the ground. And we have no free rides, we have no orgies, because that's the electrical short, and that's when things catch on fire, things melt, and we have problems.
Oh, man. Okay.
Do you follow me on that, man?
Yeah. So no, I follow you. So the electrons, and they need to be working to get down to the positive charge.
Correct.
Could you weave in like one of the accidents that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we have this analogy in mind of the overly frustrated sexual energy that is a hot feed, right? And it's looking for ground. If you short that, so if it finds a way to get to ground before it does the work that it's supposed to, turn on the lights and charge the toaster, because it's an open door, it's a free ride, those electrons are going to flow in a way that it's natural, in the same way that a lightning strike is natural, but it's not natural to the way that we live in a civilized, constructed, society. So that electricity is going to get really hot, really, really quick. It's the equipment basically isn't designed to have that electrical short. So it's gonna melt. It can cause explosions. And now when you get to the hazard side of things, if you are that person, so not the tree touching the line, but a human being, it touches a hot wire and is standing on the ground. Now that electricity says, ooh, I found a way home to mama, and it's going to be through you. And that will fry you to a crisp.
Oh. Just visualizing myself like staring at these pictures of overhead lines and elements of a substation. So you have the primary power line side, secondary power line side. It looks like there's not a single safe place in this in this works. It looks like anywhere you walk, you could potentially get fried.
And it's even more dangerous for tall guys. Luckily, I'm not. I'm 5'7", but if you're like a 6'6" dude with a pretty good wingspan and you reach your arms above your head in the wrong spot, you could definitely contact a live conductor.
Jeez.
And the other side of it too, I've seen the aftermath of this is equipment fails just because it's old, just because basically all of our transformers have oil in them. The oil can get dirty, and it can cause, through the dirt, the electricity finds a path to ground through that, and they literally explode. And a lot of them are made out of glass, and the glass shatters. It's like a nail bomb or a glass bomb. And luckily, I've never been around when it's happened, but I've seen the aftermath. And I think, like, I worked right next to that last week. If that explosion happened when I was standing next to it, I'd be done, right? So that's the other side of things, is even if you do everything right all the time, it's just you're in a very hazardous environment where equipment explodes, stuff blows up. And that's a big part of the reason why we do get paid so much, why it's a high paying job, is because it is very dangerous.
Well, I was just going to read this for the audience. Safety. So because of this is from the Wikipedia page on substations. Because of the risk of electrical shock, substations are inherently dangerous to electrical workers. To mitigate against this hazard, substations are designed with various safety features. Live conductors and bare equipment are kept separate, either with protected equipment or using screens or a distance. So is that like inspected in-house by like the same organization that you work for, or do you have like outside people come and inspect the safety?
We're pretty much all internal when it comes to that. But we do have OSHA, right? In California, you have Cal OSHA, and they show up maybe once a year, unexpected. And normally all they say is they give a shit if we're not wearing our hard hats or our boots. Like we're very much at the whim of the elements and just random chance when it comes to this stuff. I mean, obviously, you can upgrade equipment over time and hopefully technology makes things more safe, but nothing's 100% safe. And where I work in the Bay Area, because we have such an old grid here, we still do have equipment that's over 100 years old. Wow. That's in service, that's keeping customers' power on. And I try to never park my truck or stand by it any longer than I have to, because I'm just waiting for the day that a lot of these things blow up or short or something fails. And yeah, it's a very, very dangerous job.
Underneath a substation, a mat or grid of conductors laid around 0.5 or 0.6 meters underground provides grounding. This grid, which is typically copper, although it may be galvanized iron in some countries, is used to ground circuits that are being worked on to prevent accidental re-energization while workers are in contact with the de-energized circuit. Often earth rods are driven deeper into the ground from the grounding grid for lower resistance grounding. So is that something... this is interesting. So it may be surrounded by bentonite or marconite to further reduce resistance and ensure effective grounding. So is that the type of thing that you're working in? And do you have to like maintain the stuff underground?
Man, so we're getting technical into the weeds, and I like it.
This is dope, man. This is really interesting.
You started bringing up the protective ground grid underneath the substation, which reminded me of when I first started. That was my life. My life was digging the ditches with the shovel to put those in.
Damn.
Yeah. Okay. So if you go look at your local substation, some of them are huge, right? I mean, more than a square mile. imagine that underneath all of that, there's an underground, invisible grid of, we use copper because it's a really good conductor, grid of copper, like, just imagine a grid of paper, right? So there's cross squares all across that entire substation. And the reason for that is manyfold, but basically, if something does go to ground inside the substation, ground itself can receive a lot of current, can receive a lot of electricity. Again, think of the lightning, hitting the ground.
Sure.
But we want to give it a very clean and easy path to ground, because the more resistance, if something does go wrong and something does go to ground, the more resistance for that electricity to flow, the higher the current, the more dangerous, the more heat, all that kind of stuff. So we create a protective grid underneath the substation. Luckily, I worked my ass off and passed a lot of tests to get to the point where I don't have to anymore. That's not a big part of my job. Gotcha. But the knuckle draggers are out there digging ditches all day, every day, and laying down copper to create that underground grid as basically a safety grid, that we have a nice, clean path to ground. And the analogy in a home is a lightning grounding rod. So if you ever seen a big, long copper rod about 6 feet tall that you pound into the ground, you connect that to your panel. Same thing, that if something goes to ground, electricity will always find ground if it gets the chance to. Again, the sexually frustrated energy is looking for an easy path to the chick.
Okay.
So we want to give it a very clean and easy path so that it doesn't do a bunch of damage to other stuff along the way.
Got it. Okay. Dude, I'm surprised that, you haven't written more about this. This is fascinating. All of this gritty details, because all I see are just words, but you have stories behind these words, these grounding grids and the capacitors. Capacitors are banks used at substations to balance the lagging current draw from inductive loads. With their reactive load, additional capacity, maybe dispersed generation, small things are added to the system. So how do capacitors factor into your day-to-day job?
So, bro, real quick, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but a huge piece of why I love my job is the people that I work with.
Okay.
And when you were just saying that, I have this one guy, he's a 50-year-old Puerto Rican dude that's one of my best friends in the world. He sort of mentored me in the field engineer side of things, and he's worked all over the world. He came out of Puerto Rico, went to the Navy, and got into electrical engineering, and has worked in Central America and in Europe and all over the U.S., and he eventually landed at the same company as me here in California. But he loves this stuff even more than I do. And when I start saying something like you just did, explaining capacitors, he'd always finish with, "Your sound is so sexy right now. What are you talking all that sexy shit?" So I thought of my buddy Willie just now.
I love it.
A capacitor, in the way that it applies to the power grid, to utilities, is it's basically, it charges up a bunch of the electrons. So, and the analogy I used earlier really works more for DC. It's not great for AC, alternating current, but I'm going to sort of keep it layman.
Okay.
For AC, that's what powers up our homes. We can get to the point where, again, getting back to the spinning turbines, right? Everything comes to the generator that's spinning. Sometimes when the generator spins at a steady speed, because of the nature of the load, the power that's being used, particularly other generators, other three-phase motors that are spinning in our system, it can make the electrons sort of fall behind, where they're not all of the electrons are hitting that power source like a motor or like another generator. And so you're sort of wasting energy as you do that. So it takes a certain amount of work spinning that turbine at the power plant to get all the way to the end of the line to do the work, to power stuff up. And if you have other spinning equipment, you have other motors and generators, not every electron that's being created at the power plant is actually being used. So you're wasting power, right? So we put in capacitors to basically charge up, to get an excess of electrons and have them sort of stored there and ready, so that as our system gets into that state where you have too much induction, that not all of the electrons are being put to use, you can sort of flood the system with an excess of electrons. And I never thought of this before, but getting back to my analogy, a capacitor, or a capacitor bank, as we say, because we normally put a bunch of them together, is like the most sexually frustrated guys in the world. This is like
pent up, dudes. It's like it's like the Arab world or something.
Yeah, bro, for real. This is like they have like some religious, really strong
celibate, restricted male, female, or whatever.
So those poor capacitor banks are just dying. Please give me a chance to at least go do some work for eventually to get some
Yahtzee,
right?
That's awesome.
So that's how capacitor plays into the grid.
That's well, I'm not gonna forget that. It's very eloquent.
I'm telling you, man. You will never think of electricity the same by the time you're done.
Dude, like, I would love to read more of, like, if you like wrote more. Maybe this will be your second book. Like Confessions of an Electrical Field Engineer, or something like that.
Idea. Yeah.
That's so on the topic of book, let's just wrap up with like a little kind of idea summary. I know you have a book in progress. Can you tell us, what you're working on and what you want it to turn out to be?
Absolutely, man. The book is so alive for me right now because I've been working on it for 3 years. Before, I was posting on Substack, my weekly newsletter, and a good year and a half before I even started posting on X, which I've been doing for the last 15 months. So this is a 3-year project, and it feels like my life's work in a lot of ways. Now, I just turned 35, so maybe a little premature to say it's my life's work, but it definitely feels like my life's work up to this point. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason it feels so meaningful is because the book is what I want to hand to my daughters. So again, mortality being a big part of my life. I get into this in the introduction, in the first chapter. If I had a near-death experience, as I'm sure I've told you, Chuck. I don't know if you read my post online, but yeah, I got jumped. I had a gun pointed in my face. And I had already thought about my mortality a lot before that happened. And that was what got me to the point of deciding that I needed to write this book to them. But then I had the real life experience of actually going, oh shit, it's over. Like, I had looking down the barrel of a gun and the guy telling me, tell me where the fuck your car is or else I'll shoot you. And then pistol whipping me. So I knew he was pretty serious about it. In that moment, as terrifying and sad as it was, and how regretful I felt of the fact that my daughters were going to grow up without a dad, I actually did feel peace in that moment because I had finally answered the call and started writing 9 months before that. So I knew that there was about 40 articles written online, and every time I sat down to write those articles, I thought, this is for your daughters. What do you want to say to them, right? And so after that happened, I had this proof that, hey dude, one, all this sort of theoretical stuff about you being mortal doesn't feel so theoretical anymore. You really were a moment away. You were a pull of a finger away from it actually all ending. So you still have time. You're still here. You're still alive. Write that fucking book. And every time you sit down to write, think about what it is you want to leave behind if you end up in another looking down the barrel of a gun or similar analogy situation. So it feels really good that it feels like the book is done as far as the words, the manuscript, and I'm just now going in and doing the editing and revising and trying to infuse that sort of magical X factor that I don't feel like it has yet, but I'm trusting in higher power that it's gonna emerge if I keep grinding. That's the one thing I can do is show up and put in the work every day. And and then I'll announce it. I'm a little worried somebody's gonna rip the name off, but I've said it a few times. I'm going to call the book Right Already, which is the my handle on X. And the book is going to be a collection of stories of what I've learned in my life, tied around writing being the central piece of it. And it's also going to be a nonfiction book that's going to be helpful and give practical tips to other people to not only start a daily writing habit, to keep it, to tell their story, to find the magical connection to the creative process that daily writing can have. And I hope to inspire other people to do what I'm doing, to write for your loved ones, to write something that's, not just fluff, but something that is meaningful enough that you would feel good about leaving it behind when you're ready to leave this world.
I dig it, man. And if there's anything that, dude, that X factor is like half the stuff that you've been talking about. Any like all this capacitor and this, pent up electrons. It's like, dude, this has to be woven in there, man. This is like so much juice in here. Like there's life experience from the trenches.
One thing I haven't touched, yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, this is just gold. I find this very interesting. I'll be respectful of your time tonight, but like, yeah, I'm actually surprised. Like this is the first we've talked on Spaces for hours. That I really haven't delved into this area with you, but
I've never dove into it with anyone from X, to be honest, dude.
Dude, it makes so much sense. Like it's just staring. I'm like, the first time I was talking to you, maybe like 6 months ago or however long ago, I was like, why the hell is this guy talking about death so much? And now it's just like, well, the guy is faced with death every fucking day. Like he's working a substation. Well, it's a good job, but there's a serious risk involved and a valuable service to the rest of us. So thank you kindly for your service, good sir.
Thank you, man. I never drew that analogy myself, that maybe the part of the reason I think about death so much is I'm surrounded by it.
And you found Buddhism and, psychedelics, all these ways to kind of work around it. But the fact of the matter is, it is a ballsy job. I don't think a lot of people would have the stomach for that. But how critical and how lucky we are to have, people that are into this stuff and protecting the rest of us, so we can just lead a safe, comfortable life. So
thank you, man. It's an honor, and luckily it pays pretty well too. So
hell yeah. Well, Mr. Nick Bibeau, thank you for your time. And we'll talk to you again out there on X.
Thank you, bro. Man, I think this might have been the most fun I've ever had on somebody else's podcast, dude. That was really chill and really fun. I got to talk about things I've never talked about on a recorded venue. So I appreciate you, bro.
Awesome. That was a good conversation with Nick Bibeau. You can find Nick at rightalready.substack.com. I'll paste that in the podcast show notes as well. And thank you for listening. The longer I stay in this business, in working as a private practice doc, I find parallels between Nick's lifestyle as the so-called blue-collar philosopher and the life of the working doc. It's in the sense that in my day job, I'm only earning when I'm on the clock. There's not actually a clock, but if I'm at my microscope, or I'm in the frozen section laboratory, or I'm in the gross laboratory, it's definitely a hands-on kind of job. It's enjoyable. It's a learned profession. Grateful to have it. But at the end of the day, we are mechanical workers as physicians. So it's interesting to meet people in parallel fields across the U.S. and across the world. And some of those people will be on future guests of this podcast. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. If you like this conversation, or if you have some feedback, send me a message, 3 Dipper Cuts on X. You can also sign up, 3deepercuts.substack.com, as well as on iTunes, Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That will help us reach a wider audience. And it's back to work. Thanks so much for your time. I'm your host, Chuck G. Until next time, be well and stay curious.